Welcome to another edition of Global Conversations. Back again tonight, my good friend, Lev Korovin. Lev, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Regis.
All right, Lev, there's a lot to talk about. First of all, you are kind of an information warrior. You are the editor of the English-speaking Essence of Time website, newspaper that goes out to English speakers all over the world. Tell me about Essence of Time and what your role is with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Regis, so Essence of Time is a primarily Russian-centered social and political movement that emerged in 2011 when Sergei Kurganyan, who's a major a Russian philosopher, political scientist, and kind of a Renaissance man, came out with this series of video lectures where basically he was discussing the situation that not only Russia had found itself in after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but really the world had also found itself in, because basically, everybody's heard the soundbite from President Putin, how he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Our argument is that, well, yes, but the destruction of the Soviet Union wasn't just a geopolitical catastrophe, it was a metaphysical catastrophe, because the kind of whole uniqueness of the Soviet Union, of the idea that it stood for, is that man as a being, as humanity as a whole, has the potential not to stay the same that we've been for tens of thousands of years, but that we're able to ascend to something more, to again overcome the what Marx called the alienation from the human essence. And the human essence, we said, is first and foremost a creative one, in the same way that man was made in the image and likeness of God, in the sense that God is also a creator, and so is man. Okay, and that's what the Soviet Union stood for, and that was a alternative that it offered to modernity, which basically just says, well, mankind it is what it is. It's a dirty, self-centered animal, and the best that we can do is kind of use these primal self-interests for the good of technical progress, which that's kind of like what's worked for the West for the previous 500 years or so. But kind of what really changed all those things is with the beginning of the 20th century and First World War I, with its just completely meaningless slaughter that happened because one capitalist power was overtaking another one. Okay, the ascendant Germany against the the British Empire that was struggling to stay number one. Does that remind you of anything now? And people saw the plains of Europe, just covered with millions of dead young men, for who died for a reason that no one could articulate, no one could explain, and they said that, well, this modernity is a dead end. And with that, there were two alternatives that were voiced. One is what I said, the red alternative, the communist alternative, the alternative that says, well, let's take this humanism that was kind of sitting there unused ever since modernity kind of replaced the Renaissance. Why don't we make another Renaissance and really show people what they're capable of? Versus the other alternative is the fascist alternative, the Nazi alternative, that says, well, really, the only things that were ever good about humanity belong to the very distant past, okay, to the lost golden age. And therefore, the goal then is to stop the forward movement of time, to stop any kind of progress, and bring humanity back to this condition of the so-called lost golden age. And in order to make sure that this never stops, then you need to articulate that humanity isn't one single whole, that people are not all created equal, that there are people who are born to be masters, there are people who are born to be slaves, and then there is the overwhelming majority who aren't even really people. They're just kind of animals that look like people, and you can just do with them whatever you want. And in the metaphysical catastrophe of the collapse of the Soviet Union, then, was that this fascist Nazi alternative, okay, was left without a counterbalance, because modernity was dead. Okay, modernity was essentially dead at the start of the 20th century. It got slightly reinvigorated after World War II, and because part of the West was able to go into this consumption frenzy. But look around, the consumption frenzy is over. Okay, first we had COVID, now we have these anti-Russian sanctions, which for some reason are making life much more painful to the people who live in the countries that are trying to leverage these sanctions, as opposed to Russia, that's supposedly directed against. Okay, so this old world where there was this kind of primitive reading of the American dream as this white picket fence, with this house of like material prosperity and 2 cars per family or whatever. That's all over. That's leaving, and it's not going to come back. Okay, and because the only reason to keep that around at all was to offer some kind of alternative to what the Soviet Union was doing, to say, oh, hey, at least you can have more nice things, in the Western system. Okay, whereas the true kind of meaning of communism was that, well, it's not about things at all. It's about restoring man to his true untainted form. Okay, to his true untainted essence, to the creative image and likeness of God. And in that sense, to make sure that there's no distractions, fine. Okay. Give him, what he needs to be dignified. Okay. But not, feed him to the point that, everybody's dropping dead from obesity related disease, that kind of thing. So with that kind of picture of the world that we have, okay, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the only real way out, at least the way I see it, is to reboot the Red project. Okay, to have reinvigorate it, patch it up, to identify the problems that it contained that made it collapse in the first place. Okay, because if it was all fine and dandy and everything was wonderful, then it would still be standing, right? So it had internal reasons why it ended up destroying itself. Okay, so it's about that kind of rethinking and having learned those lessons to pull off a full-fledged comeback. Okay, because otherwise it's just going to be humanity one-on-one with this Nazi monster, which has now completely reemerged. 10 years ago, this wasn't obvious, and people might have kind of done one of these things, thinking that people were talking about this are crazy. Now at this point, I mean, anyone with eyes and half a brain can identify the problem. It's just, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. So the Essence of Time movement is an attempt to recapture that, the essence of our humanity, what we could be, correct?
Absolutely.
So you are living in a community north of Russia, of Moscow, and you're attempting to put that belief into practice and to continue discovering it, but also to communicate that to the outside world. And that's where your Essence of Time website and connected with your news service, Rossa Primavera, come into play. So just briefly explain the connection between the two and what is the main goal.
So Rossa Primavera is the main news agency for the Russian-speaking left, just in the Russian-speaking world. It's something that Essence of Time established. It coincided with the beginning of the civil war in Ukraine in 2014, when the Nazi coup happened, when the attempts at genocide in the Donbass began. Okay, and the reason for a social and political movement to have a news agency is to be able to articulate what we see in the day-to-day news that's happening around the world. Okay, right now, I would say there's give or take 300-ish people who write for the news agency every day. We have about give or take about 1,000 news stories that come out from every corner of Russia, from every corner of the world. Okay, there's we have people who monitor every country in the world and look at what's happening there. Okay, and then the English language Essence of Time website. Okay, what we do with that is, first of all, we have we can't translate all 1,000 news stories that come out every day. That's 300 people to write them versus I don't know 8 people who actually work on the English side. But we pick out the kind of key most important things that we think people outside of Russia should pay attention to. Okay, and we send it their way. It's also the platform where you can find the English language translation of the book Essence of Time, which kind of goes into greater detail regarding the worldview that I just briefly laid out, and also on that site now, what we're doing is we're publishing the English translation that we're kind of making right now of a very important scientific work, which is called Ukrainism: Who Constructed It and Why. Now that was a multidisciplinary research work that was done here at the commune, first in 2017, in response to first the Maidan and the Civil War, and the whole idea that people, not only in Russia, but I doubt really anywhere outside of Ukraine, really realize what kind of enemy we're facing in Ukraine. There were attempts to give kind of a sort of, I say this without kind of deprecation or anything, but kind of primitive, pseudo-Marxist explanation of, well, these are, one clan of oligarchs, is using these neo-Nazis against another clan of oligarchs, and it's all about the money, follow the money. It's a lot of what the left traditionally has focused on. Okay, but the kind of truth of the matter is that this unique Ukrainian flavor of not just radical nationalism, but Banderite Nazism is something that wasn't even an invention of the 20th century. It's something that has been very deliberately and painstakingly developed since at least the 16th century. Okay, as an attempt by the West to take a piece of the Russian people and to very meticulously brainwash them into thinking that not only they're not Russians, but that the Russian people are their mortal enemy. And again, kind of they go into these very dark Gnostic layers of thinking, saying that, well, Russians, they aren't even really human, that a lot of things that later on the German Nazis said about the Jews, about how they're kind of not human, was used before them by these Ukrainists, so to say. so that book that came out in Russian and is being translated into English, not only exposes this artificial kind of socio cultural political construct, but really gets down to the nuts and bolts of it about who created it, how it functions, and that's all being published right now on that English website.
Yeah, I want to dig down into this book and the first chapters that the first chapter that is being introduced already. I read it, and wow, with the time that we have, and we'll probably have to come back and do further shows on this because it's so important. There isn't anybody. Well, let me start with this. Prior to 2014, in the United States and the West, there wasn't anybody that really approved of the Nazis and what the Nazis did in World War II.
With the exception of the CIA.
With the exception of the CIA. Okay. But
who harbored these people, right? For all this time. Yeah.
I'm gonna let you run with it. Because my good friend Douglas Valentine in a 2-day interview with me talked about the CIA in 70 years in Ukraine. So what's happened is really amazing. Since 2014, the entire West and the United States have kind of whitewashed this Nazi condemnation. And now it's like, well, no, they're just the moderate rebels. They're just kind of the good guy. I mean, it's unbelievable how so many people in the United States have got blue and gold flags, waving them, stickers on their cars, their Facebook emojis, or whatever you want to call them. It's total insanity. They have no idea that they are supporting the same thing that they've condemned since the Second World War. So what I have learned, and I want you to explain this, you use the term Ukrainism. This didn't come about in the last 8 years or the last 10 years. It actually goes way back to what, World War One?
Even prior to that, but it was certainly weaponized during World War One. First and foremost by the German Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, who especially once we had the February Revolution, because people don't remember this necessarily in the West. There were two revolutions in Russia in 1917. There was the February Revolution where Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, and he was replaced by this kind of what we would call like liberal kind of Republican nationalistic temporary government, where the kind of main people who threw their weight around there were the old imperial elite, especially from the side of Russian capital at the time. And those people ended up doing such a horrible job at even maintaining their own grip on power that in the immediate aftermath of the first revolution, of the February Revolution, pieces of the Russian Empire began to fall off. And one of the pieces that fell out of the Russian Empire at that time, pre-October Revolution, was Ukraine. They created the so-called Ukrainian People's Republic. They declared their own sovereign state, and they began to kind of put forward feelers towards the Germans, because one of the elements of Ukrainism beforehand was kind of displacing Russian Orthodox Christianity with so-called Greek Catholicism, or Catholicism of the Eastern Rite, where the whole idea is kind of keep some of the external paraphernalia, so to say, of Eastern Orthodoxy, but make it subjugated to the Pope, subjugated to the Vatican. And with that regard, the Catholic Habsburg Empire was seen by the people who then broke off from Russia in Kiev as a natural ally. And they said, here we are, come and help us out so that we can be separate from these Russians. And between that time and the defeat of the Central Powers in World War I, the Germans ended up establishing, first a mission in Ukraine, and then just an occupational government, a military occupation, the main purpose of which was just to take all the wheat out of Ukraine to feed the German Empire. Then afterwards, once the decisive defeat of Germany was recognized, by the armistice in Compiègne, then what the Soviets had in front of them, because by that time, after the February Revolution, we have the October Revolution, okay, where Lenin and the Bolsheviks take power not from the Tsar, okay, who by that time had long since been deposed by his own inner circle, okay, who wanted this kind of fake democratic thing that ended up falling through. When Lenin and the Bolsheviks took power from this temporary government, they had the problem before them. Well, how the hell do we take all these pieces of the Russian Empire that had already fallen off and glue everything back together to just at least guarantee the safety of Russia from a new outside invasion. And then they kind of partially with the use of force, yes, but also with finding people in that broken off Ukraine who were not so crazily pro Western, pro German, who understood that in order to survive, Ukraine had to be together with Russia. Convince them to, along with Russia and Belarus, to found the Soviet Union. Okay. So when that happened, this Ukrainism, it didn't magically disappear. There were all these groups who had fought against the pro-Russian Ukrainians and certainly against the Red Army, who continued these like anti-Russian operations because the western part of Ukraine at that time wasn't under Soviet control. It was part of the newly independent Poland, and these people, granted, it's a difficult question to answer. Who do they hate more, Russians or Poles? Because when given the chance, they are very efficient and very enthusiastic about exterminating both. There were, especially during World War II, this very infamous Volyn massacre, when the followers of Stepan Bandera, who was kind of the new generation of these same Ukrainists, who had tried to build a mono-ethnic ethno-nationalist state on the rubble of the Russian Empire. Okay, this new generation came and then committed not just mass murder of Poles, but like really twistedly sadistic mass murder. The human imagination of a healthy person cannot quite imagine the level of depravity and sadism that these people executed at the time, right? By the way, our good mutual friend Jareth Kopis, okay, also has a great book that he's done, Ukraine Forever Upon, which I also recommend everybody to get a hold of and read. And also what he's doing now is he's presenting in this in a very good format, kind of a brief period by period history of these radical Ukrainian nationalists and how they ended up being Nazi collaborators, right? So I encourage everybody to take a look at that. We, speaking of which, have those both on Jareth's channel that he has, which is called Notes from the Underground. And we also, with his permission, put it up on our International Essence of Time YouTube channel, so everybody can look at that. Anyways, when Nazi Germany emerged, okay, as a power to, how these people saw it, how Bandera saw it, how his pals Shuhevich, Stetsko, Lebed saw it, to help them exterminate all the Russians in Ukraine and all of the, they call them Moscowized. So not Russians, but kind of Russophilic Ukrainians, or even not necessarily even you have to like Russia to be labeled a Moscowized person by these people. All you have to do is speak Russian as your native language, for example. Something that simple. You're called Moscowized, and therefore corrupted, filthy, and then you also must be exterminated along with the Russians and the Jews. Okay. So this is a unique aspect to this radical Ukrainism, that they see part of their own even ethnic group as something that deserves extermination. and which is part of the, so to say, answer to this mystery that certainly has puzzled many in the West. When they see that these like Ukrainian nationalist battalions are using the local population as human shields against advancing Russian forces. Well, how could they do this? You would say, how could they, kill their own people? Even like outside of places that were, where there's active combat, Russian versus the forces that are loyal to Kiev. The Ukrainian army comes into a place like Bucha, and then massacres basically, well, first and foremost, anybody who had anything to do with the Russians while they were there, who not necessarily like were part of the administration or anything, but even people who like sold food to the Russian troops that came in. Those are the people who were slaughtered, and then that was of course blamed on the Russian occupiers. Well, the reason that they're able to do this is because they believe deep in their heart that these people deserve to die. Okay, because they're not proper Ukrainians. So after this group that were active Nazi collaborators during World War II were defeated, okay, many of them ran towards the American and British occupation zones in Germany and in Austria, because they knew full well what was going to happen to them if they were to get picked up by the Russian military counterintelligence. Okay, and by that time, the U.S. and the U.K. they realized that, well, the next big enemy is going to be the Soviet Union. So, what are the tools at our disposal? They thought, to use against the Russians. So they find within these about 2.5 million displaced persons, about 250,000 Ukrainians, and within those 250,000 Ukrainians, they find a few well-organized groups that seem to be very cohesive and seem to be very hostile against the Soviet Union. And they figure out, well, how can we use them? Who are they, first of all, and are they worth using? So to help answer that question, at that time still the OSS, this is before the CIA was founded, asked this question to a Hungarian agent of theirs called Zsolt Aradi, who was kind of the Hungarian press attaché at the Vatican, and who during World War II was kind of involved in separate peace talks of Hungary with the Western Allies, and that's how he got picked up by the OSS. So Aradi uses his Vatican connections to get a hold of the chaplain of this neo-Nazi punitive battalion called Nachtigall, or Nightingale in English. This guy, Ivan Grinyoch, who was both a Greek Catholic priest and also an active member of this punitive battalion whose main job was to inflict terror on civilians on occupied territory. So um, he kind of brings in this guy Nikolai, or the Ukrainians say Mykola Lebed, who was the chief of security for Bandera, who was trained by the Gestapo to commit, again, mass murder and very like sophisticatedly sadist torture. And he said, "Yeah, we'll work with you. Sure, like, help us out. We'll work with you. We're ready to go." So the first thing that the OSS had the idea of doing is, oh, why don't we use these guys for intelligence gathering? So they tried to drop some of these Bandera collaborators back into Soviet Ukraine with radios, so that they can collect intelligence, and they were very quickly picked up by Soviet counterintelligence. So yeah, that didn't work. But they also used them to try to sniff out kind of Soviet agents within these with displaced Ukrainians, which they did that, but they also used that opportunity to, again, very like sadistically, get revenge, or exert their will upon their enemies within this refugee community. Which part of those refugees were people who were forcibly brought over by the Nazis to work as slaves. So they didn't like these guys, and they said, well, since the Americans on our side, we're gonna show you who's boss. Well, meanwhile, the OSS, they're looking at this, and then the very early CIA, when it's founded, or they were as well. These guys, they're not really useful at all for intelligence gathering, because instead of giving any kind of accurate information about Soviet Ukraine, they just start spitting out really biased propaganda. It's completely useless in terms of strategic decision making. But then they have the bright idea, well, there's this document, NSC-4A, which gave the CIA authority to conduct psychological warfare operations. And they're like, oh, psychological warfare, these guys are good for that. So they bring over this Bandera's chief of security, this sadistic torturer and mass murderer, to the United States under a fake name, and have him set up this center for publishing analysis for kind of information warfare, called Prologue. And he starts putting out all this propaganda, the main purpose of which is to completely whitewash these neo-Nazis, to say that, well, Bandera wasn't a Nazi collaborator. They fought against the Germans too, and look, they spent part of the time in a German concentration camp. Which, yes, they did spend time in a German concentration camp, but it's not the kind of concentration camp that you or me and me are thinking about, or you're being tortured every day and have to sleep on naked wooden boards. No, they were basically put up in luxury conditions, and kind of were continuously interacting with the SS and kind of sharing knowledge. So that's not the kind of concentration camp that people normally think about. So, anyways, whitewashing these Nazis, and at the same time demonizing the Soviet Union. It's at that time that a lot of the kind of political mythology, so to say, the fake history, right now, like every day we have to deal with fake news, people coming up with different like false narratives about what's going on right now. Well, before we had fake news, we had fake history. And part of the fake history was the story about a manufactured famine in Ukraine that was supposedly done by Stalin, by the Soviet government in order to kill Ukrainians, which nothing is further from the truth. That was the last famine in the history of the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire. Before that, under the Tsar, you had periodic famines like this, every dozen or so years. Okay, and when the government in Moscow found out what was going on with the famine in Ukraine, in the Volga basin of Russia, and in Kazakhstan, not just Ukraine to exterminate Ukrainians, but in this big area of plain where there was a massive drought, they started redirecting grain exports back into those regions to try to get people fed. But people still ended up dying, and it's tragic. But it has nothing to do with a famine that was orchestrated on purpose. Okay. Part of the thing that exacerbated it was at the time they were putting together these collective farms because it would be easier to manage those, again, also to do like exports and stuff. And some of the people, especially the better off peasants who were asked to join these collective farms, decided to kind of hide their property, hide their wheat, their other things that they grew, so it wouldn't belong to the collective farm. Well, they did a good job hiding it, but many of this hidden wheat was stored in such substandard conditions that it ended up rotting, and nobody could eat it. So you had a baseline problem of these droughts, where that was the last drought to cause a famine in the history of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. And together with that, you had this kind of problem with part of these people saying, well, the collective farm isn't going to take my possessions, I'm going to hide them away, and then they ended up rotting. So it's always a much more kind of complex and inconvenient history for everybody. Okay, because people still end up dying. Okay, and let's say that Moscow reacted late. Okay, when I finally found out about what was going on, but it has nothing to do with the story that this propaganda group was trying to promote. The reason they were promoting this story is then to say that, well, Stalin was such a monster that it was really logical and okay for these Ukrainian nationalists to side with Hitler because Stalin was worse than Hitler. That's the reason to propagate a story like that. So there are plenty of other examples of this kind of mythology that they were creating, and they were feeding it both to the emigre community in the West, and also kind of sending it back CIA back into Soviet Ukraine. Okay, and then when the Soviet Union broke apart, there was a group of very radicalized Ukrainian emigres and also radicalized Ukrainian nationalists that had stayed in Ukraine all the time and were kind of fed more of this propaganda to kind of boost themselves up, that were ready to go and were ready to direct Ukraine back into this anti-Russian direction. Okay, to then kind of make it a piece, an instrument in the hands of the United States first and foremost, NATO and the European Union as well, right? Because there's always mixed interests, and kind of if you look at Ukraine's then the Ukrainian government's attempts during these past 30 years to join NATO, which they tried, they were trying to do it kind of from day one, and they got kind of like an interesting response from the West, that like, well, it's not time yet. We're definitely going to make you NATO members. Don't worry about it, but it's not time yet. Why don't you kind of make it so that your army is able to be interoperable, to kind of be able to be guided by NATO generals? Okay, why don't you make your territory very accessible as possible to NATO military infrastructure? But we're not going to make you NATO members because if something turns ugly, then we don't want the burden of having to protect you. That's what they really meant, and that's what's playing out now. Is they're trying to turn Ukraine into this kind of Afghanistan 2.0, where Russia would hopefully be bogged down and bled even after the proper military hostilities end. There's they expect that there would be a period of very active urban guerrilla warfare, and when let's say Putin or other people who use this term say denazification. Okay, it's on the one hand a very deliberate term, because this is truly a situation that requires denazification, where ever since, especially ever since the Maidan coup that propelled these neo-Nazis into power, some people would kind of argue that, well, what do you mean brought them into power? They're not winning elections. The president's a Jew. What are you talking about? But Nazis don't become Nazis in order to win elections. Nazis become Nazis in order to terrorize into submission. Okay. It doesn't matter how many votes they get. What matters is that next to every member of the Ukrainian parliament every senior military commander in the Ukrainian military, even in the lower ranking units, lower echelon units, there's a Ukrainian nationalist who figuratively or sometimes literally has a gun to their head and tells them, if you try to be creative and not do what I tell you to do, then you're gonna get, some lead into your skull. So this Jewish president, also has people who can tell him those exact same things, and nobody cares what kind of elections he won. If he tries to back out now and try to make some kind of peace, try to hand over these senior Nazis, he's gonna eat lead, and he knows it. Okay, which from that standpoint is kind of too bad for him, because he knew the game that he was getting into. Okay, but anyways, these again, Nazis that terrorize the rest of the population into submission. There's about 1 million of them. There's about 35 million Ukrainian citizens. They were able to get that kind of power in their hands after the coup. And for the past 8 years, they haven't just been trying to murder the people in Donbass. They are also very deliberately brainwashing the rest of the people, including the people who they consider Moscowized Ukrainians, who now it's completely okay to either use as human shields or to use as sacrificial animals in these false flag murders to blame the Russians. Okay, because, well, metaphysically they think they deserve to die anyway, but they still brainwash them too. Okay, and when we talk about denazification, okay, it isn't just about bringing criminals to justice that have blood on their hands. It's also a major task, and a very difficult one, to explain to people that they had been brainwashed, to show them how they were brainwashed, and to convince them that the truth lies not with the people who are brainwashing them, but with you. And that is kind of the whole next step here. Sooner or later, okay, with one degree of difficulty or another, the Russian army will win. Okay. When ordered to win, the army wins. As long as it's not betrayed and stabbed in the back by, politicians in the rear. Okay, including in Moscow, who are trying to have some kind of sweet deal with the West for themselves. As long as that doesn't happen, there will be a military victory. But then the next step is the ideological war. Okay, to show the people who were trained and vigorously indoctrinated over the past 8 years to hate us, to show them that no, we're not the people who are the enemy. It's the people who had you in submission all this time.